In a recent announcement, the White House stated that President Biden would return to the U.S. after the G7 summit in Japan instead of continuing his planned trips to Papua New Guinea and Australia. President Biden personally informed Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of this decision. Wonder what's going on in the U.S. that its president had to cancel his foreign trips? Why is there so much tension over the country's spending limits? What happens if the U.S. defaults, and why should the world be bothered? These foreign trips are canceled due to the ongoing negotiations in Washington regarding the United States debt ceiling crisis. Hello, and welcome to Primetime TV. In today's video, we will explore the U.S. debt ceiling crisis and why the Quad Summit was canceled after Joe Biden called off a trip to Australia. What is the U.S. debt ceiling? The U.S. debt ceiling, or the debt limit, refers to the maximum amount of money the U.S. government can borrow to fund its operations and meet its financial obligations. These obligations include payments to federal employees, the military, healthcare programs, Social Security, and interest on the national debt. Typically, when the government needs to spend more than its available revenue, it raises or suspends the debt ceiling through a vote in the U.S. Congress. This allows the government to borrow additional funds to cover its expenses. Currently, the U.S. debt ceiling stands at $31.4 trillion. The limit was last raised in 2021 when Democratic lawmakers in the U.S. House and Senate approved increased spending limits. On January 9, the U.S. reached its borrowing limit. And since then, the U.S. Treasury Department has been employing various extraordinary measures to generate additional cash and avoid default. However, these measures are temporary, and it is only a matter of weeks before they are exhausted, leaving the U.S. unable to make necessary payments. Why is there an impasse on raising the debt ceiling? The impasse on raising the debt ceiling in the U.S. can be attributed to political differences and disagreements between the two major political parties, Democrats and Republicans. The issue has become increasingly politicized over time. Currently, Democrats control the White House and the Senate, while Republicans hold a majority in the House of Representatives. The philosophical differences between the parties contribute to the impasse. Republicans generally prioritize fiscal conservatism and are cautious about government spending. They view an increase in the national debt as a sign of an out-of-control government. Many Republicans believe continued borrowing and rising debt levels will lead to long-term economic and social consequences. On the other hand, Democrats tend to view government as a tool for improving the lives of Americans. They see raising the debt ceiling when necessary as a routine measure to ensure the smooth functioning of the government. Democrats argue that it is essential to maintain the operation of various government programs and fulfill financial obligations. Is there a solution? There is no clear solution to the impasse on raising the U.S. debt ceiling. Negotiations between congressional leaders from both parties and the Biden administration are ongoing, but no deal has been reached yet. The tension is rising as the June 1 deadline approaches. President Biden remains optimistic about finding a way forward and has been engaged in discussions with lawmakers. However, more work must be done to bridge the divide between the parties. Both sides acknowledge that they are still far apart in reaching an agreement, but there is a possibility of getting a deal by the end of the week, according to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. The potential economic consequences of a default are also concerning. Government officials estimate that more than 8 million people could lose their jobs, and the overall economy could suffer. Congress must act promptly to raise or suspend the debt ceiling to prevent these dire consequences and ensure the continued functioning of the U.S. government and the well-being of its citizens. How will it affect the world? A U.S. default would trigger economic and financial catastrophe, leading to global financial instability. The U.S. dollar is the world's primary reserve currency, and U.S. Treasury securities are considered safe haven assets. A U.S. default would likely plunge the country into a severe economic recession. The U.S. is the largest economy globally, and a recession in the U.S. would have ripple effects on other economies. Trade and investment flows would decline, affecting countries with significant trade links with the U.S. Fragile economies, particularly those dependent on exports or with high levels of debt, would be particularly vulnerable and at risk of entering a recession. Damage to U.S. leadership in the global economy. A default would tarnish the U.S. reputation as a reliable economic leader and damage its global economic leadership. The U.S. has historically played a crucial role in shaping global economic policies and institutions. A default could undermine confidence in the U.S. government's ability to manage its finances effectively and erode its influence in international economic decision-making. The chances of the U.S. defaulting on its debt remain low. Throughout its history, the U.S. has consistently raised the debt ceiling and avoided default. The debt ceiling has been raised 78 times in the past 63 years since the U.S. Congress first enacted it. Prominent political figures, including Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, have expressed confidence that the U.S. will not default. McConnell stated that the United States has never defaulted and will not default in the future. While negotiations between political parties are ongoing and no agreement has been reached, there is still optimism that a deal can be reached by the end of the week. Despite acknowledging the differences between the parties, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has emphasized that default is off the table. What are your thoughts on the same? Let us know in the comments below.